a special presentation of LLBN with archaeologists Dr. Lawrence Garrity and Dr. Doug Clark. Excavating the Bible.
Welcome to this edition of Excavating the Bible, what archaeology can teach us. This program is dedicated to exploring the contributions of Middle Eastern archaeology to our understanding of and appreciation for the Bible. I'm Doug Clark, Director of the Center for Near Eastern Archaeology at La Sierra University in Riverside, California, along with my co-host of this program, to the audience's left, far left, Dr. Larry Garrity, also from La Sierra, longtime archaeologist, good friend of our special guest, began, I think, working maybe together in the 1968. 1968.
Yeah. We were very young.
We were.
And our very special guest, Dr. William Dever, Emeritus Professor of Archaeology, Near Eastern Archaeology at the University of Arizona. Now, splitting your time between Cyprus and Pennsylvania and writing books, like crazy writing books. Retirement has not been retirement.
No, and visiting places I'd like to visit.
Well, that's true. You can choose now.
Yes,
you have the choices. So, we want to talk about a site over which you have had oversight for several seasons, and that is Tel Gezer in Israel. So, when we talk about this site, let's ask your connections, and then let's think about historical and biblical connections. So your connections and your interest in, your excitement about Tel Gezer.
This is the 50th year of the start of the excavations in 1965. It was the brainchild of Ernest Wright, our mentor and professor at Harvard. He wrote his doctoral dissertation at Hopkins in 1937 on Gezer. He never forgot the site. And when he had a chance finally to go to Israel as a visiting professor in 1964, he said, "We're going to excavate at Gezer." And the dig started that way, and I've spent much of the rest of my life connected with this site. Ernest is long gone, but it was he who started the project, and he started it as a training project for a younger generation of America. So from the beginning, the stress was on methodology.
Right. Now, the seasons that you had, you were supervising?
Yes, from 1965, 66 through 71, and then I went back in 1984 and 1990 again, and now my students are excavating there. So the excavations continue.
They continue to work. And
we published 7 volumes of the excavation so far, as well as a popular book, which is finished but not yet in press.
Right.
And it's one of the important things about this excavation is all the people that Bill and his colleagues trained there who went on to direct projects of their own.
Including?
Myself.
I counted recently 25 dig directors out of the Gezer excavations. Almost every younger archaeologist working in Israel or Jordan came out of these excavations. I don't think Ernest foresaw that, but it was he who launched it as a training excavation.
Right. And we learned from that too, because in Jordan, our work in Jordan is always involves a field school, so that we have these.
And more Gezer graduates later.
That's true.
That's right.
That's true.
That's true.
Yes.
Let's take a minute and look at some artifacts in front of us, and then let them, because these are arranged chronologically and represent the periods at Gezer, and then that will take us to some slides to illustrate the historical periods and the biblical connections.
This will be like going home for
This
me.
will be like going home. So what do we have in terms of dating and connections, biblical connections? These are artifacts not, of course, directly related.
No, but they would be similar. These vessels over here would be from the Middle Bronze Age, when we have a great fortification system, which we can see. These would be from the Late Bronze Age, and we have a tomb, a rich tomb from that period.
And for people who don't know dates for Middle Bronze, Late
middle
Bronze.
of the 2nd millennium, let's say, and then late 2nd millennium BCE. And then when we come to a vessel like this, which could date from the 10th century, that would be the age of the famous gate, the so-called Solomonic gate, which is controversial, which we'll want to talk about. Gezer has a long history, more than 3,000 years, and there are 26 successive buried layers or strata over that long period of time.
Now, people find that hard to understand and believe. How does that happen, that you get these kind of number of layers?
Well, because of frequent destructions, of course, which means the site is destroyed, then abandoned for a while, then people come back and excavate the remains and reuse everything and rebuild, and then 100 years later it happens again. And it's still happening, I believe, in the Middle East.
Right.
The last period represented at Gezer?
In the Roman period, the site
So we actually do go
is abandoned
into
thereafter, but it starts before around 3500 BC.
Right, right. So we can think about the New Testament time as kind of the end.
Yes,
we don't
it
have
was
any
no
New
longer
Testament
prominent in that period.
yes.
Yeah.
So you have these cycles of
Yes, absolutely.
influence, strong influence, and then waning. Biblically, where does Gezer show up biblically? When do we first read about? Well, in fact, let's not even go biblically. Let's go extra biblically
we
too.
have Egyptian texts that are very early that mention the site. The earliest biblical reference is in the time of the conquest in the book of Joshua, and it's said that the king of Gezer was killed in the famous battle in the valley of Ajalon, but it specifically indicates that the site was not destroyed, and indeed it wasn't. The biblical writers got that correct. So that's the first time it's mentioned. It's not mentioned in the patriarchal narratives, although it was known, it was a prominent site then, but the Bible doesn't remember that far back. And then it later plays a very important role in the period of Solomon.
Which we will come to as we think about it. Extra biblically?
Well, we have a number of Egyptian texts. There's a text describing the destruction of Gezer, probably in the year 1468 by Thutmose III. It's mentioned in the battle itinerary, site number 102. And we have a violent destruction of the city, which certainly can be connected with the Egyptian text. And then there's the famous Merneptah inscription of the son of Ramses II, dating around 1209, which mentions Gezer as being a site that is taken by the Egyptians. That's the famous text that mentions Israel for the first time.
The only one, Egyptian.
The earliest and the only extra biblical text that mentions Israel from a little before 1200. And Gezer is mentioned in that inscription, along with Ashkelon.
The Gezer and Yanoam and what
Those are the three sites. We're not sure where Yanoam is, but Ashkelon and Gezer are well known and excavated, of course.
But the determinative would suggest cities for those two.
The Egyptian sign that tells you how to read the text makes it clear that it is not a nation state. It is a people. It's a gentilic term. It's plural. So
the Israel connection.
Yes. So the other peoples named are nation states in a way, but it describes Israel as a loosely federated people, and that's correct. That's what Israel looked like around 1200. The Egyptian text has got it right.
Right. Let's turn our attention to some slides, and this is going to lead into some interesting discussion, including the controversial stuff, which we don't turn away from. We do not shy away from these things.
My festrit is entitled Confronting the Past.
Yes.
The volume of essays in my Confronting.
So here we have a picture. It's not in focus as well as we would like, but describe this for us.
I always say this is the most important site ever excavated in the country, namely mine. This is Gezer, the great mound seen from the north. It's about 33 acres, one of the large Bronze and Iron Age sites, and it would have had a population of perhaps 3,000 people. It would have been a big city in the biblical period.
I was thinking it might be the second or third best. But
it's not the largest, but it's close to it.
Okay, but it's still the best.
And you have the second best in Jordan.
The next slide takes us to an example of what, 13 or 14 of these?
You know, sometimes we know the Arabic name of a site, but we don't know the biblical or ancient name. There may not be a correspondence. In the case of Gezer, we have a rock-bound identification. This is one of about 12 or 13 bedrock inscriptions around the edge of the mound, and we're reading on one line, Alkiu, belonging to Alkios, a Greek name of the Roman period, and then in the other part of the stone, we have in archaizing Hebrew, Tehum Gezer, the boundary of Gezer. So this is Gezer. We know it. It's labeled. It's the only site in the country that has a label.
And what date? This has to be
These are Roman,
right?
but it means the name of the site had never changed. And the Arabic name is almost the same. Tel El Gezer, Gezer, the same.
Right.
So we know that Gezer is biblical Gezer. There's no question.
There are several of us who excavate in the Middle East who wished we had 13 boundary markers to identify our sites.
It spoils the fun of it.
So the next slide takes us to the major plan.
Yes, this combines the excavations of Robert Alexander Stewart McAllister, who dug there before the First World War, in the first large-scale excavation anywhere in what was then Palestine. Palestine under the Ottoman administration. And to the left, you see the Middle Bronze Age gate from the second millennium. And then to the right, in Field 3, the more complicated, smaller gate, which is a gate of the Iron Age, which we have regarded as a gate built by Solomon. And we're basing ourselves partly on the famous passage in 1 Kings 9:15 to 17, which describes how the Egyptian Pharaoh went up and burned Gezer with fire, and then ceded the site to Solomon along with his daughter in a sort of dowry arrangement. And then it says that Solomon built or rebuilt or fortified 4 sites: Jerusalem, Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. And we have almost identical gates at these 3 sites. Jerusalem, we don't know. So we have argued when we excavated this gate that this is in fact the gate mentioned in 1 Kings 9, built by Solomon.
It's a 4 entryway gate.
It's a 4 entryway gate of a type we know elsewhere. But I want to stress that skeptics have said, oh, you know, you just jumped into the trench Bible in one hand and Paul in the other, and you're just trying to prove the Bible. Our evidence for the date does not come from the Bible. It comes from stratigraphy, the comparative study of layers, and from ceramic chronology. So we're not trying to prove that Solomon built this gate, but it's a good bet.
Right. I want to ask about the other gate, the earlier gate on the lower left. How does this one compare with the one at Shechem?
It's very similar, and they belong to the same date, but this one is even larger, even more massive than the Shechem gate, but they're contemporary. It's very interesting. What apparently Solomon did was to take the old Canaanite 3 entryway gate and increase it to a 4 entryway gate, which was presumably more efficient.
Right.
And you might notice on either side of the gate there's a double wall or casemate wall. So if you want to imagine what Israelite fortifications looked like in the age of Solomon, this is what they looked like. And the skeptics don't agree, but they're wrong.
But they're wrong. Okay.
The evidence shows that they're wrong.
Right. How would you compare this one with the Hatzor and with the Megiddo ones?
They are almost identical in dimensions, in construction. Yadin, before his untimely death, was the one who first caught on to this because he looked at the old plans of McAllister of half the gate, and he was the first to recognize that it really was a city gate. McAllister didn't catch on to that. And then he compared it to the one at Hatzor that he had excavated and the one at Megiddo, which he knew. And he argued these are exactly the gates mentioned in 1 Kings 9:15. And again, people made fun of him, but he was right.
But he was right.
He was right.
And stratigraphy in both of those places would...
Well, the Megiddo gate was dug in the 30s and has never been touched since, but the Hatzor gate has been redug and re-excavated. And I would say the pottery from all of these gates that we know is almost exactly the same. And on those grounds, we would date them to the middle of the 10th century, the age of Solomon.
Right. Now, it was 1990 that you went back specifically to answer some questions?
Yes, to answer the skeptics.
Talk to us about what that meant, because you had a crew of some friends of ours too.
Well, yes, but you know, sometimes you raise new questions and you have more questions than answers, so I thought to respond to the challenge. Finkelstein, Israel Finkelstein, and a few others tried to argue these date, these all date to the 9th century. They belong to the era of Ahab, not Solomon. So we went back, and I must say that the new evidence was welcome. And now, this last summer, when I was there, I have seen new evidence even better than what I had. And again, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind about the 10th century date of the Gezer gate, and I'm pretty sure about Hatzor. Megiddo, we can't re-excavate it. It's been dug, but I suspect it belongs to the same period.
Right. The next slide takes us to a part of a trench.
This is our
archaeologists do these, don't they?
Narrow trench to probe through all 28 strata at the site, all the way from the Roman stratum on top, all the way down to bedrock. Took us 4 years to dig this trench. It was a sounding of the kind you've done too, where you get a sort of preview of what you're going to find in the mound.
And you put me in the very bottom of that, and I excavated Chalcolithic period in that trench.
That's bedrock.
1968. That's end of bedrock.
Yeah, so there you have the whole long history of the mound in one trench. But we didn't expand.
Right. But they do tell us a lot, don't they?
Yes, you have to do a sondage of this sort. It's a good thing to do early on.
Right. Okay, our thing is getting away from us here. Sorry about that. The next slide is going to take us to...
Yes, this
What?
is a section through a plastered ramp that was built up against the great inner wall, which you see, and notice the person standing on bedrock. That wall, city wall, is the largest single-phase stone structure ever found in ancient Palestine. It's the Middle Bronze Age city wall, and this is a cut through this elaborate rampart. This was probably designed to against chariot warfare, to keep the chariots at some distance so they couldn't get up against the wall and
And you're
batter.
talking about that Christmas tree design
Yes,
there.
it's alternating layers of chalk and fill, and it was marvelously engineered.
It was. Wood, it's Middle Bronze, so, and it's, if one thinks about and compares this with Shechem, and we think about what,
Shechem
patriarchs.
has a rampart of the same kind.
Right, and so the patriarchs, matriarchs would have bumped into these. I think you described these once as maybe these massive cities that show up in the story as impenetrable.
In the stories about the spies sent out by Joshua, they came back with a report of great walled cities standing on their mounds. This is what they saw. These, and they would have been impressive, no doubt.
Very.
Now, in the Israelite period, you have the same kinds of ramps, but on a more modest scale.
Right. Now we have one at Ameri. It's actually designed very well, but not quite that carefully. And this slide takes
This is a
us to
small
the
fragment about the size of the end of your thumb of a cuneiform tablet, a clay tablet written in wedge-shaped characters. That's a safety pin for scale. It's a series of names, some of them Canaanite, some of them Hurrian. So this is the only tablet of this kind that we found in 10 years or more of excavation, because written remains are often scarce. But this was found in the debris of the destruction of the gate in 1468 by Tutmosis III.
Important connections. Tutmosis III was important to our work in Jordan. His seal shows up several times. It was reused, probably a couple centuries.
He was one of the Egyptian pharaohs who annually campaigned into Palestine and up into Syria.
And this was in his first regnal year in 1468, probably in the spring of the year. And Gezer is mentioned in the list of sites destroyed, and this is a burnt tablet from the destruction.
Showing that he was actually there.
Yes.
In Jordan.
It was found by Ernest Wright's daughter.
Oh, really? Isn't that interesting?
Tutmosis III's return, I guess, from battle in Canaan describes the site, which seems to be our site. And so a number of people have made the point that our site might be on Tut's list, Tutmosis III.
Right. In the case of Gezer, we know it because the reading, the Egyptian reading is beyond doubt. And we have the actual destruction, which we can date almost to the month.
Right. The next slide takes us to another kind of find.
These are two gold figurines found in the destruction debris under the body of a young woman who was crushed when the roof fell on her. They're in gold. They're in a special case of their own in the Israel Museum, and probably represent the Canaanite male and female deities, El and Asherah, who are remembered in the Hebrew Bible.
And then we turn to an older slide. This is an artifact, this slide. Right?
This was taken by Robert Alexander McAllister around 1908 or 1909 and shows the famous Gezer high place. He thought it was a Canaanite-style high place like the ones mentioned in the Bible. 10 large standing stones. He excavated it, never published it, buried it, and no one living had seen it until we excavated it again in 1968.
And then we look at the
Here is our first deep
picture.
trench. McAllister dug everything around these pillars, so there wasn't anything we could do but dig under them, which we did. Not I personally, but we sent some people down there, and we were able to date it, which he couldn't do. He didn't know the date, and he misunderstood almost everything about it. We now know it's a Canaanite sanctuary, probably where a cultic ceremony was conducted to renew a covenant. So each stone probably stands for one town or city in the Covenant League.
And we will see those.
And here it is restored the way we left it. It's still that way today. And you see the 10 standing stones. These are what the Hebrew Bible calls matzevot, standing stones that commemorate something important, the appearance of a deity, or in this case, probably these represent 10 tribal members of a league that came here annually to renew their covenant.
But somehow related to religion too?
Certainly so, but it's unique. It's the only thing like this ever found. It has no parallels. And to show you how hard it is to publish, this was dug in 1968. We finally published it in full this last year.
Well, good job you've done.
Well, I thought time was running out.
Yes,
So.
right.
No, that's important to think about, and especially the more we learn about these standing stones, often in sets that are odd numbers, like 7 or 9 or 3
And
or
if
5.
you notice carefully, this is 7 plus 3.
Okay.
7 standing. So these are probably sacred numbers.
And keeping to that
Yeah.
tradition.
So this is a good example of the Canaanite religion that the biblical writers don't like and condemn. And this is what. And by the way, it's interesting. Nowhere in this area did McAllister find any pottery of the Israelite period, nor did we. This was probably buried and deliberately put out of use long before.
Then we move to a wall here, it looks like.
Yes, this is from the 14th, 13th century. This is the outer wall, which is not as massive as the inner wall. But again, it shows you what these walled Canaanite towns were like and why the Israelites were terrified when they first confronted them.
Late Bronze Age.
14th, 13th century.
Right, and we had seen some artifacts from then, so we connect
Yes.
those as well.
Yes.
And from
This
that,
would have been the period in which Canaanite probably was at its peak of prosperity.
and then some kind of plaque we have.
This is a Canaanite-style so-called fertility plaque showing the great goddess. We know her name, Asherah. She had to do with conception and childbirth. Asherah is remembered in the Hebrew Bible. The biblical writers condemn her, which means she was still around.
Right, right. Well, also connections with war.
She, in the Ugaritic text, the female deities are sometimes war deities. But Asherah is called the mother of the gods, the consort of Ale, the great god, and she's a goddess of beauty and fertility, like Aphrodite in the later cult.
Is it Egyptian influence to see the hairstyle?
Yes, the Egyptians also venerated her, and they gave her a typically Egyptian headdress. So when we see that sort of wig, we know that's Asherah. We know who she is.
Right. Then we move to another slide of a cylinder seal.
This was the kind of thing wealthy people would have had, a cylinder seal which you could roll over a patty of clay, the way we have done, to register a document or something of that sort. So even people who couldn't write could leave their mark in this way. These seals are mentioned in the Hebrew Bible numerous times, so a lot of people had them, and they could exist both in the cylindrical style and a stamp, which you could use in a ring to make a mark.
Okay. Then we go back to archaeology.
A tomb of the 14th, 13th century.
Often caves.
Yes, it was in a cave in the bedrock. There was a succession of more than 30 burials in this over a period of nearly 200 years. This is the last burial, a young woman whom we dubbed Sarah. And she was the last to be buried. And notice the previous burials are all pushed back. And in the Bible, when you die, it is said you are gathered to the fathers. Your bones are put in a family tomb like this, along with your ancestors. So this is what the phrase means, to be gathered to the fathers.
That's a biblical statement that we are currently studying through genetics, through ancient DNA.
Yeah, these are family tombs.
And this is going to be very interesting to see how these
We've done a
were held
complete
together.
analysis of the skeletal material in this tomb.
Right.
These
And
are
the
some of
next
the
slide?
items from the tomb, imported Egyptian items that a wealthy Canaanite family would have had. This is an alabaster pedestal vase from Egypt.
So what do all of these tell us about trade relations, or are we talking about military?
You know what they
kinds
tell us more than all about the great disparity between the wealthy and the poor. This is the tomb of some very wealthy individuals. Most people were buried in a pit in the ground. That was it.
And the next slide.
And again, this is one of the earliest examples of Egyptian glass known anywhere from the 14th century, now in the Israel Museum.
Beautiful
is.
glass. Early.
One of the earliest examples known.
In the scheme of glass. Then we go to another
A
artifact.
pen case, an ivory with a pair of baboons. You put your pen and ink in the middle. So people were writing already before the biblical period, not in Hebrew, of course, but in Canaanite.
Right. Which becomes
A dialect,
Hebrew.
related closely. Hebrew
At least comes.
is a descendant of Canaanite. It's a dialect.
Fair enough. Okay. And then we go to a house.
Yes, the
plan.
sea peoples, the Philistines, known from the Hebrew Bible. overran the site partly in the 12th century, and this is a house from that period, full of a kind of pottery that we identified with these newcomers who were not Semitic. They were from the Greek world. They were invaders along the coast.
Would you call it Philistine now or Sea People?
I would be a little more cautious nowadays, but it does have a lot of Philistine pottery. I think probably they were Canaanites, but they made use of imported Philistine pottery.
And
of
the
which
next
that's
slide?
an
Yes,
example.
here it is.
Yeah, beautiful bichrome pottery, unlike the Israelite pottery of the period, which is very simple and undecorated. But this is pottery that's at home most in Cyprus and in the islands of the Aegean. These are newcomers. They're Europeans. The Bible knows about the Philistines and sees them as the arch enemy of Israel. So they were. We know more about the early Philistines than we do the early Israelites now.
The next slide takes us to another drawing, another plan, and we've talked about the
famous
Solomon,
gate that we would date. By the way, we're beginning to have C14, carbon-14 dates, and the most recent dates are hovering around the 10th century, not the 9th. So I think the conventional chronology is going to prove to be correct.
Right. And then one more from the artifact file.
Again,
from
McAllister's. So
McAllister's,
this is Phoenician-style masonry. Now, what does it say about Solomon in the Bible? That he imported masons from Hiram, king of Tyre. So again, the biblical memory of Phoenician architecture is correct.
Right. And then we have, it's unfortunately a bit of out of focus, but
The
this would
restored
be
gate. As it now looks, you can see it today.
Are you going to call it the Solomonic Gate, or are you going to call it, so you just keep that name?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you are a biblical archaeologist.
What can I say? Some of my best friends are.
You forced us to think about that term, and now you're reinterpreting it in ways that are responsible.
Yes. We simply have to redefine the term in a more sophisticated way.
Right. And then a slide here of that
gate.
same gate, and I think that's the last of the slides. So, what do we learn from Gezer as we think about this relationship between Bible and archaeology? Maybe where is it going in the future? And
well, I think one thing we learned is there will always be controversies, and they're healthy. They force us to rethink, to excavate. I went back for new evidence. My students are there now. So rethinking is healthy, but it can be disturbing. In the end, I think it comes out all right. I only wish I would live that long.
Well, you're seeing in the work that your students are doing,
yes,
a tremendous amount of information.
They are my legacy.
They are your legacy, and it's just been a privilege having you here to talk about a site that has been important and a theme of Bible and archaeology.
It's had great influence on the field of biblical archaeology.
That's
Ernest Wright's vision.
That's right. So we thank you, Bill and Larry, and all of you for joining us for this edition of Excavating the Bible. We hope the program has provided enlightenment for your mind and food for your soul. We look forward to next time. Until then, think ancient, keep believing, and keep exploring. For Excavating the Bible, I'm Doug Clark.